Let us begin in prayer. Please keep in mind those that were impacted by Hurricane Ida, especially those in our close Lasalle community. And as we reach the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, all those that felt the impact of that fateful day. Our prayer tonight is apropos for this college process. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. St. John Baptist of Lasalle, live Jesus in our hearts. So welcome back to those of you we saw online for the January presentation. I was just speaking with my colleagues here. This is our first live event since January of 2020. So we nearly snuck it in maskless. We had it a week ago. But thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. We know there's a lot going on in your lives and a potential storm coming later on this evening. So we're going to move as efficiently as possible. And thank you most importantly for entrusting us with your sons during this really important stage, this significant step in their lives. My name is Jared Brett. I'm in my 17th year here in LaSalle's College Counseling Office. My 10th year as the Director of College Counseling. Previously, I worked in the Admissions Office at Villanova University. I'm joined by our two Associate Directors of College Counseling, who are both in their 8th year in our office, Mrs. Mara Deal and Mr. Jim Sawyer. Mrs. Deal has seen two of her sons go through this process and graduate from LaSalle. She has a son, Sean, who's been in the Schreier Honors Program at Penn State, and her other son, Shay, who's in the Honors College at South Carolina. And she's currently beginning this process with her daughter, Devin, who's a junior at the Mount, so she can't get enough. Senior at the Mount, sorry. And Jim Sawyer has over 12 years of experience in college admissions at institutions such as Philadelphia University, Fairleigh Dickinson, Swarthmore, and St. Joe's. He has extensive knowledge of the international admissions application process. And finally, Katie Palopoli in the back there. Katie makes everything work behind the scenes. She is in her 6th year here at LaSalle, her 3rd year in our office. We work as a team. We meet on a weekly basis where we share all the different things that are changing in this world of admissions. As you can imagine, what's happened over the last 3 years, each of the last 3 years has been different. That being said, the bulk of it has remained the same. So we work as a team. We're also in communication with your son's grade level counselor, Mr. Tony Resch. He's there for academic, social, personal, emotional counseling. He's been with them since 9th grade. So it's been nice to have them as they spend all 4 years with the same individual. We appreciate those that submitted questions ahead of time. In the interest of efficiency and timeliness, we incorporated most of those into our presentation. We respectfully ask that you hold questions to the end, and then we'll open to questions at that time. Before we dive in, we want to briefly tell you what our job is here. Our job, in a nutshell, is to educate and support your sons in this process. So September, October, November, December is really when this cranks up. And then in the second semester, as decisions really start to roll in, and he's working through that where do I go part of this process. Because of what's happened over the last 2 years, there's an increased pressure on us to be up to date as possible as we go through this process. And how do we do that? Well, we do it by staying informed through our national association, the National Association for College Admission Counseling. There are 6,000 individuals involved in that. We were supposed to be presenting on that in Seattle, but it's been moved for us to Houston next year. In addition, we've served on focus and advisory groups at various colleges throughout the country. Currently, we're on the advisory group for Penn State University and University of Miami. We presented and attended state conferences as well as those hosted by the College Board. Next week, I'll be representing LaSalle at the Boys in Higher Education Roundtable hosted by Vassar College. On a yearly basis during a normal year where we fly to various campuses across the nation. Over the last 6 years, we've seen universities in Scotland, Ireland, and England. We meet 3 times a year with the other independent college counseling staffs in the area, and twice a year with 60 college counselors from public and private schools from the tri-state area. All of this serves 3 purposes. We get to interact with our colleges and our peers. We get to share LaSalle's story with them, who we are, the rigor of our academics, the strength and excellence of our different programs. And in turn, we're able to hear the latest insights, the latest trends, the latest changes in the world of college admissions. In addition, we publish an applauded high school profile, so the colleges that may not be familiar with us get an in-depth look at what it means to come out as a graduate of LaSalle. We also have an excellent college counseling website and 3 robust social media channels. We know how to be effective. Our colleagues in colleges do. Our friends and our brother and sister high schools do as well. Past students know, past parents know. Tonight you're going to hear in depth how we take all this knowledge and pass it along to and educate your sons. If your son works on the plan we've created, step by step as we've outlined for him, he should be ready to make a good match and complete a well thought out application to the colleges that he has in mind. So we've created the action plan. The trick is for him, with you there to guide him, to follow through on that plan. We touched on this at the junior meeting in January, but we feel it's important to reiterate because this issue has only continued to increase. A year from now, your sons will be at college on their own. For most colleges, you'll have just dropped them off, tearful goodbye. Now is the time, if you have not already done so, for them to start to learn to take that personal responsibility. And that brings up a concern of ours that we've seen for the last 6-7 years. It's the importance of them engaging in this process, taking ownership of it. We're aware of the stress that they're under. We know they're busy. We know you want the best for them. And we know they sometimes do not show any signs of moving forward. Your stress bills, their stress bills, even when they don't show it. We see it a lot on our end of what's going on. While it might seem unnerving to put this process in your son's hands, again, with you there helping, young men who have a problem solved for them believe they don't know how to solve problems. They don't know how to deal with conflict, and they don't get to develop grit and resilience. And they're absolutely right. They're not going to be able to do that unless they take ownership of this and practice. And we don't want the first time they bump into something to be when they're hours from home next year on a college campus. They have a safe place with us to bump into things and for us to guide them back as they go through this process. And I mentioned Mara earlier and what she's been through with her 3 children over the last 5-6 years. So I wanted to bring her up. This was usually a piece that I did, but she brings a lot more insight into it as I only have a 4-year-old. So Mara, if you could pop up and take it from here, and then I'll be back on.
Hi everybody, we're here, can you believe it? Right? I still picture Devin like going off to kindergarten, not going off to college. So, yeah, right, Mr. Brett still pictures her as a junior, so, but no, she is a senior. So, first of all, congratulations to everybody for getting this far. Special congratulations to all of us that had kids at Made in America this weekend, because praise the Lord, it's over, and I really hope we never have to go through that again. Devin is my youngest, so. So enough about that stuff. I really just want to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Brett was saying about the parent involvement with the college admission process. And you know, I've seen this process through a couple different lenses. One as the assistant in the office, as a college counselor, and as a parent. So I kind of have a unique perspective on it. I've had the stress of helping my kids work through the process and trying to find their new home for the next 4 years, while also balancing the practicality of, you know, distance and how to pay for it and all that type of stuff. And I know that every single one of you in here tonight wants the absolute best for your son, right? You wouldn't be here if you didn't. That's what we all want. And as parents, we have a lot of emotions tied up into this. And you know, I see a lot of posts about this was like, you know, the like last first day of school, and like we're having like all of these like last type moments, right? It's so emotional. With my boys, I was like, yeah, okay, see ya. And with my daughter, it's a little bit different. I think probably because she's the youngest, but I really wasn't like that with them, seriously. But we do have a lot of emotions tied up in it. And our ultimate goal when it comes to college for our kids is that we want them to end up a place where they're happy, where they're going to thrive academically, personally. But the process isn't just about, you know, getting into college. It's finding a place where they're going to stay. And so it's a good reminder that although this is very much a family decision, right? Especially when you're the ones that are either co-signing a loan or writing the tuition check. Your son, as Mr. Brett said, is the one that's going to be on the college campus this time next year. So we need to make sure that he is empowered to be the driver of this process. So what are some tips that we can use to help ensure that, help make that happen? Be thoughtful with your word choice. He is applying to college. We are not. Let him, and it's just stuff that, again, this is all well-intentioned. Nobody, says these things with any malintent. It's just, these just serve as reminders of little ways, little tips that we can help empower our sons. Let him write his essay. Colleges want to hear the voice of a 17 or 18-year-old. They do not want to read something that is like professionally polished. Does that mean don't look at the essay? No, absolutely. Go ahead and edit it. Just make sure your son's authentic voice is shining through. Help him with grammatical errors and, help him make sure that it's his voice and his personality that's coming through. With regards to essays, one of the assignments junior year was for your boys they were given all the Common App prompts, so they should have, if they did the assignment, they should have at least a rough draft of an essay, and they should have bullet points or starting points for some of the other essays. That was to get them to start thinking about what to write. So they should be revisiting those essays and refining them at this point. Your sons have a lot of valuable resources. We had over 100 guys participate in the college essay boot camp that we sponsored this summer. The college counselors and the writing center are here to help review essays. If your son did not attend the college essay guy boot camp, they are aware of the college essay guy website, which has a lot of great free resources on it. Similarly, let him complete his own application. In my time here, every year, again, a well-meaning parent kind of oversteps the bounds because, they want what's best and they feel like they know and they should do things. So we've had parents put their name on the application, not the son's name, including a mom who did it last year. It's true. We've had, wrong social security number, the parent's social security number, birth date, that's kind of shocking, for an admissions rep to see. And, even this is kind of sad, we've had a couple instances where parents applied to a college on their son's behalf without telling their son. And so, if we put aside the moral, ethical, legal issues with that, of signing your name, saying that you're somebody else, it's when we see the effect that has on the guys, we see that they feel demeaned, that they get angry, why, it's embarrassing for them and everything. Again, the only point of mentioning this is that it happens, and we all have the best intentions, and it's just kind of serving as a reminder that what we want to be doing right now is we want to be getting these guys ready to be independent and able to advocate for themselves next year when they're on their own. Other things you can do, let him be the one that's registering for visits, contacting admissions representatives. These are all great ways for him to be engaged in the process, to demonstrate interest, and to hone those communication skills that are going to be critical going forward. The next thing I'm going to say is definitely, I think, the hardest, but what you should do is just try and maintain that focus on your son and your family unit, right? Try and, don't get caught up in what your son's best friend is doing or what his girlfriend is doing or what your nephew or niece is doing, your boss's cousin's son, they got here and, just kind of focus on your son. It is his journey. It's going to be different for everybody else. I mean, I know we have a few families with twins. It's different from one twin to the other, right? They're different people. So just kind of keep that in mind. And I know it's hard to do that, especially now that we can be out in social situations and there's a lot of chatter. It's just making sure that you're focusing on your own family. So we're not saying that, you know, have a hands-off approach and be like, all right, cool, like, here's your problem now, Mrs. Deal, you know, good luck, and walk away. We're not saying that at all. We want you to be kind of the safe harbor for him. We want you to be the, you know, continue to be the cheerleader, continue to be the one, you know, his biggest supporter. Show him that you have confidence in him. You know, you'll be teaching him how to advocate for himself. This helps preserve your sanity, basically, is what it does as well. And I know it's hard. I know it can be hard to sit back and watch them fall, watch them fail, right? I mean, we don't want that to happen, but that happens in the real world. So we need to make sure that they are prepared to be able to, you know, when things get tough, to figure out new ways of doing things. You know, one of our sayings that we say, and that it's a common saying in kind of the admissions world, is that an over-involved parent can lead to an under-involved and disengaged student or son. And that's not a winning combination. I actually was listening to a podcast the other day, and the director of admissions at Georgia Tech, I thought, had an interesting way of saying it. He said, you know, when you're looking at college, you're thinking about return on investment, right? Like, you know, we're paying this much, how, you know, what are we going to get for it? But think about the return on engagement. The more engaged your son is, not only in this process, but once he's on a college campus, that's going to pay the biggest dividends. The quote up here behind me, you know, basically I'm not going to read it for you, all can read it yourselves, but it's basically admissions directors are saying this, that, you know, parents forget that they're looking for, admissions reps are looking for subtle ways that students are showing their maturity and handling this process themselves, running the show themselves is one subtle way that they look. So just kind of one last little grouping here. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about stress and the stress that our guys are under. College admissions process can be very stressful. It's funny, on this same podcast, I heard the guy say, you know, if you say to somebody, like, tell me what words come to mind when you're talking about college, you know, there's like all these positive things, right? And then you just throw in the word admissions, and it's like all these negatives and stressful and everything, and it's true. There's a lot of stress with this process. Every single personality type feels this stress. The process raises issues of independence, self-identity, relationships, grades, careers, throw in a pandemic, and how about a tornado possibly too, and, you know, vivid examples of social injustice, right? It's hard enough for us to grapple with these things, and much less a teenager. So, you know, be cognizant of that, and as I said before, be the safe harbor. Help them take a break from the stressors. Talk to them about different things, podcasts, Netflix, go for a walk, whatever. Just be the positive force. We realize that you have concerns. We realize that there's a lot of uncertainty, and we also realize that we're asking you to take a leap of faith and to trust us. But we're also asking you to trust yourselves. Trust that we're experienced, that we care about your sons, because we really do. Trust that we're extremely competent. Trust that we want to see our guys enroll in schools that meet their needs and that are the best fit for them. But trust yourselves. Trust that you've raised your son to be capable and confident. And you chose a high school that fosters independence. You chose Lasalle for a myriad of reasons. It could be academics, athletics, emotional growth, whatever it is. Trust that your son will follow your example and make the choice of a college that's right for him. Now, before I step off my soapbox, just one last thing. We're going to throw a ton of information at you tonight, and the purpose is not to overwhelm you. It is just to let you know all the resources that are out there. Pretty much, if you circle back to our website, a lot of this information you can find there also, but take a deep breath. I promise you, I've been through it twice, survived. I'm pretty sure I'll survive the girl, but we'll see. I'm pretty sure I will. And we'll all survive, and we're all in it together. So again, thanks for being here, and now we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty.
So before we dive fully into the nitty-gritty, we used to say when this popped up, trust the process, and we're not really able to say that anymore after 6 years. But this is last year's class. Probably couldn't have gone through a rougher year in terms of not being able to visit in person on campus and make those connections possibly with admissions reps, etc. And they came through with flying colors. So just a couple of highlights. And this is actually pretty consistent for most of the years of the graduates here at Lasalle. They typically apply to close to 300 colleges and universities. They're accepted to 240 colleges last year. They ended up enrolling and matriculating at 98 different colleges and universities across 25 states, District of Columbia, NYU Shanghai, Trinity College Dublin. 83% of the class earned over $41 million in documented scholarships. Not that this is everything, but 75% of them were accepted to schools that are in the top 50 nationally for either public universities, national universities, or liberal arts colleges. Overall, as a class, they got accepted to 68% of the schools they applied to. And then the last one that we love to tout is 25% of the class, around 60 guys, matriculated, so this fall, they're going to colleges 500 miles from LaSalle. So, you know, and obviously there's some excellent colleges in our own backyard within a couple hours, but these guys historically want to look far and wide, and we've only been tracking this number for a few years. I would put that up with anyone, especially given what's going on in the world, that they were willing to kind of stretch their legs and look far and wide at this approach, and especially in the beginning of the process. So with that, we're going to go through rapid fire. We're going to bring Mara back up here. That was quick, right? And we're going to go through dates and deadlines, timelines. What you should be looking for is this communication, different ways to apply, test optional, standardized tests, trends, score, college, Kickstart. Here we go.
Did you miss me? Okay. All right. So, where are we? All right. So, communication. So, again, some of this stuff we did talk about at the meeting in January, but main ways that we communicate with your sons and also with you, but email. Your son should be using his Lasalle email address when communicating with colleges. He should be checking his email frequently. Colleges do track click-throughs. I have a story from a guy last year that I thought, definitely had the chops for a school, like easily, and he applied early action, was deferred. I called the rep and said, can you help provide some context here, what happened? And the rep said, we've been emailing him since October, and he hasn't opened one email. So we're assuming that even though he could get in, we're not a top choice of his. So it's just a good reminder for guys to be checking their emails. It's also how we will set up meetings with them. Our meeting requests will go through Outlook. Speaking of meetings, all right, so what happens at the one-on-one counselor meetings? Right now, at this point, we're getting reacquainted with them, finding out what happened, what they do over the summer. Did they have a job? Were they visiting colleges? Just catching up, but then also thinking about looking at the college lists and what makes sense as far as the list is concerned. Talking about test scores, where to send test scores, maybe where not to send test scores. We're going to run through college Kickstart with them, which we'll show you again at the end. Talking about letters of recommendation. We're getting information so that we can write our counselor letter of recommendation. Basically really helping them develop that list and then walking them through the process. Another main way that we communicate with the guys is through group advisory class. We will be meeting with them once a cycle through the end of October. Each class is an hour long. Again, we're talking about the application process. The next 2 cycles, we will be going through the Common App step by step with them, so that they are completing. You know, some of your sons have already started it. Others aren't even sure what their password is. So we'll make sure, though, that by the end of the 2nd cycle, a good portion of the Common App is going to be completed for everybody. Also, along with that, we're going to be in group advisory class working on something called the SRAR, which is the self-reported academic record. Several schools now require that. That is, instead of us sending a transcript, they don't want the transcript from us, they want the student to self-report. So it's an additional step for your sons. Where it's gaining popularity. Not really exactly sure why. They think it's more efficient on their end. They don't have to wait for a transcript from us, but it does put the onus on the applicants now. So we'll be going through the SRAR with them, teaching them how to complete that. But Penn State, Delaware, Pitt, these are all schools that require it. I just want to go back and say, with the one-on-one counselor meeting, your sons are welcome to pop in and, you know, talk to us whenever. We do have these formal meetings, but if they have questions, we encourage them to stop in. If it's one of my guys and I'm not there, they can ask, you know, Mr. Brett, Mr. Sawyer, Mrs. Palopoli. As Mr. Brett said, we work as a team. So total open door policy, and that helps us foster great relationships with the guys. Certainly they can email with any concerns also. Okay, so this is where you're like, oh, all right, my son should have done that by now, huh? So SCORE is what we use as, it's a great search vehicle, but it's also where we keep our letters of recommendation. The teachers upload their letters there, we upload our letters there. And this is where your son will tell us exactly where they're applying, and then that's how Mrs. Palopoli knows where to send all of the documentations. At the end, I'm going to show you very quickly, you guys have the power in SCORE. You can, you know, there's certain things that you can do. You can search, you can do some cool things in there too. So they've had to complete some assignments last year. This year, those assignments continue. All the assignments are in OpenLMS, which your sons have access to. So they get reminders of assignments too. One thing that I always tell guys is, I didn't know is not an answer. When you see all the different ways that we communicate with them, I didn't know, it just, yeah, sorry, but you did, you know, so that doesn't count. So what they should be doing now, adding schools to the applying list, still searching, if, you know, updating the activities and achievements. We want to know, again, what they did this summer. If they're, you know, now in a leadership role in a sport or a club, that should be indicated in the activities and achievements list in SCORE. There's a career profile in SCORE, which is really helpful, that they should be working on now. 2 last surveys. One is some additional personal and academic information, and the last is we ask them to write a letter, a recommendation for themselves. So what is it that they would want an admissions rep to know about them that may not show up in their application? Essays, I mentioned earlier, they should be working on that. College Kickstart is a great tool. We're going to go over again at the end, show you it helps to balance check lists, and he should be working on the Common App, and I already mentioned the SRAR. So just some things that they should be working on. If you don't already follow us, we're a great follow, tons of content. We like to think of ourselves as influencers. But we do have people, actually we do some cool schools that will retweet us or whatever too. So, but yeah, a lot of our information, again, this is like another way of meeting the guys where they are. You know, if they're not going to be looking at their email, they're definitely looking at Instagram and Twitter. So, and then we, as the parents, it's really just us that are looking at Facebook. But that's where we are. God bless you. Other ways of communication. Again, I told you, like I didn't know doesn't cut it. The daily bulletin. If we have any important deadlines or anything that we want guys to know about, it's going to be in there. We've got old school bulletin board outside of our office, and we also have a new school digital signage outside of our office. This is from, I guess, this week, right? Yeah, so on here, this is the list of schools that are coming this week and the beginning of next week. And guys know that they can sign up and score if they want to come. And you can see that some of the visits are in person and some are virtual. For any virtual visits, we will still have that hosted in the college counseling office. We'll have the rep up on the TV in there and do the Zoom that way. And then, of course, our website, as I mentioned, is a great resource. And Mr. Brett will go over that in a few minutes. All right. Dates, deadlines. September 10th, which is this Friday. If any of your sons are interested in applying to a U.S. Service Academy, West Point, Annapolis, Air Force Academy, etc., Mrs. Palopoli needs to know by Friday. September 23rd, here at Lasalle, is the College Financial Aid Night. We do that night with Gwynedd and the Mount, and we just kind of rotate who's hosting it. Bonnie Lee Ben, who is currently the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Villanova, she is the prior Director of Financial Aid, she will be the presenter. So that's definitely something to mark on your calendars. Speaking of financial aid, October 1st is when the FAFSA application opens for this, for your son's school year. And you can start completing the FAFSA and the Css Profile, which, again, we'll get into more information about that. Mr. Brett will talk more about financial fit also in a bit. Coming up October 2nd, that's a Saturday SAT. The late registration deadline for that is September 21st. And then October 5th is College Interview Day. So for any of you that have had guys go through Lasalle, you're somewhat familiar with College Interview Day. The picture on the left is what traditional College Interview Day looks like. The picture on the right is what last year looked like. And honestly, Katie Palopoli is like one of the most humble people, but she gets stuff done. So last year, we normally have anywhere from 50 to 70 admissions reps that are here at Lasalle. Katie was able to make the magic happen, and we didn't miss a beat. And we had over 60 colleges, 75 admissions reps, 627 different Zoom links that Katie set up. So we're very committed to this process and making sure that, that even with the things that are going on in the world, that your guys are still getting the very best from us. So this year, it's going to be kind of like a combination picture. So, with the pandemic, in our own lives and our own businesses, we've realized that there are some of the changes that we had to make that actually are good changes. One of the happy accident type things from College Interview Day last year is that we had several schools that had never participated before participate because they could do so virtually. So we're giving schools the option this year, and it's great because we have some schools that either aren't traveling again yet or that are far away, and we're not normally on the radar that will be participating. So we'll have mostly in person, but we will have several schools that will still be doing Zoom. Again, that's October 5th. That is where it's the admission rep that is here, probably 95% of the time, I guess, is going to be the person that's actually reading your son's application. They will be given a list of all of the schools in homeroom, probably in a week or two. Once we have the complete list, they'll be asked to choose up to 5 different schools to speak with. And then, as you can imagine, with 274 seniors and 60, 70 odd reps, scheduling is a little bit tricky, but again, Katie works her magic. Your son might not get all of the interviews that he requests, but he definitely will get some. And if he doesn't get an interview, but he really wants to talk to a rep, it's fine, you know, at the appropriate moment where he could, you know, just go up and introduce himself, you know, come see one of us, and then we lead him to do it. But colleges love it because our guys come prepared. They are polite, they are respectful, they ask good questions. The colleges have the opportunity to look at the transcript and the activities resume, and we ask them to give an honest assessment of the student. It's not like an instant admission day or anything like that, but and the colleges, that, you know, they like to make that connection too, because for them it turns into yield. It turns into guys that actually enroll. All right, back to dates and deadlines. October 8th will be the last day that your son can let Mrs. Palopoli know that he is applying someplace early action. Doesn't mean that that list is absolutely set in stone, but we need to have a really good idea of where they're applying so that we make sure that we hit the deadlines. We pride on ourselves on making every deadline that we are aware of. In order to be aware of it, your son has to let us know. October 13th, you guys should have received some information about this. Again, as an extra service, we're providing the SAT in-house, in school, on September 13th. So the rest of the school will be doing PSATs, but it's not something that you should feel compelled to have your son do. In the little starburst there, you can see some days off that the guys have. And October 13th is one of those. So September 27th, October 11th, 12th, 13th, those are all days off. Those are days where guys can go look at, do college visits, work on their applications, work on essays, that type thing. We really want them to kind of use that time for working on their applications. October 23rd is ACT. November 1st and November 15th are the most popular early action deadlines. Mr. Sawyer is going to talk about ways to apply with that and what that means. There are some schools in the South, Georgia, South Carolina, they both have October 15th early deadlines. November 6th is another SAT. And then December 10th would be the deadline to let Mrs. Palopoli know any additional schools that they might be applying to that would have a later deadline. We have Christmas break, December 20th to January 9th. So similar to the summer, we're not in the building, but we are available. We will be checking our emails. We want the guys to get as much done before Christmas break because we don't want to get an email at 10:30 on New Year's Eve saying, "Hey, Mrs. Deal, I decided I'm applying to this school and the application is due tomorrow." You know, that's unfortunate to say the least. January 1st, January 5th, that's kind of a common regular decision deadline. February 15th is a common deadline for you to get all the financial aid information, financial aid applications completed. Schools will let your sons know, usually by April 1st, they will have a decision. That's for regular decision schools. And then they have until May 1 to let schools know where they will be attending. All right, real quickly, just want to touch on responsibilities, what your son does, what we do. That's my little rendering of the internet cloud. I need to take one of Mr. Johnson's Adobe classes, I think. But, all right, so what is he responsible for? The application and any fees associated with that. His essay, any supplemental essays, supplemental information, if he is, if there's a portfolio that needs to be submitted, or if there's an audition that needs to be set up, those types of things, all your son's responsibility. If a school is requiring the SRAR, where he self-reports the grades, or there's some schools where grades are submitted in the Common App. Again, that is your son's responsibility. If he is sending test scores, they need to be sent from either College Board or from ACT, depending upon where he took the test. The test scores are not on the transcripts. So that is 100% his responsibility. What's our responsibility? The transcript, the counselor letter of recommendation, the teacher letters of recommendation. Mr. Brett mentioned earlier a school profile that gives colleges an idea of our academic rigor. And then a secondary school report, which is more kind of like demographic information about Lasalle. These are all different things that help the colleges put in context your son at Lasalle. Your son can submit his application before we submit his stuff, or we can submit his transcript before he submits his application. It doesn't really matter timing-wise. Obviously, what I said before is the most important part is we need to know where he's definitely applying so we can send his information. Everything goes up into that cloud, and then the college pulls down the information from the cloud. One note of caution is that, so he could submit something, next week, and we can submit his information, and everything's there. It doesn't mean a school is going to retrieve it right away. It can take weeks. I'm warning you, it honestly can be super annoying because some colleges, their retrieval system doesn't talk to their communication system, which means that all of the documentation is there, but like this side of the house doesn't know it. So your son's going to get emails saying your information isn't here, but it really is there. So just fair warning, it usually takes schools a couple of weeks for their systems to talk, especially as we get deeper into the season. Also, college reps right now, they are either out on the road if they're allowed to travel, visiting high schools, or they're holding Zoom meetings, whatever. They're not reviewing applications right now. That their reading season starts after their deadline. So, that's for most schools. So just keep that in mind also. Okay, I think you've heard enough of me. I am now going to turn it over to Mr. Sawyer to talk about standardized tests and ways to apply.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. I'm allowed to talk too, so they let me come up and speak sometimes. It's building up towards me. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're glad to have you here. First and foremost, I'd like to let you know that this is a very dates and deadline-driven process, as you probably saw thus far. When I start my group advisory classes with the guys in the spring, I always tell them we're talking about this process in a matter of months. We're looking at 8-9 months out when we start in January. When we got back to group advisory for this senior year, a lot of deadlines might come up by November 1st, November 15th, so we're talking about weeks. So just know that, like I said, it's a very dates and deadline-driven process, and it's going to go fast. So you may think November 1 sounds like a world away. That sounds like the holidays. It's just about 7 weeks away. So imagine where you were 7 weeks ago, mid-July. Take a deep breath. I'm not trying to cause panic. I'm just saying it's one of those things where, I always recommend to the young men put together a calendar of when things need to be done and check those things off. But anyway, what I'm really here to talk about is SATs, test optional institutions, and the various ways that you can apply to college. So first, test optional schools, as you see behind me. A test optional school, for those that might not know what it is, it's a school that does not require a student to submit a standardized test. However, while they may not require a test submitted, many times they do require some sort of submission, such as an extra essay, possibly a graded paper, or something that they may have gotten out of a class. As you can see on the screen, there are close to 1,700 test optional schools in the United States right now. Pre-COVID pandemic, there was about 1,000. So once the COVID pandemic hit, a lot of schools decided to go test optional for the year, given that some students couldn't take tests at that time. SAT testing days were being canceled and so on. Since then, a lot of them have stayed test optional. Some might only be for another year or so till we get, hopefully, things back to more normal. But I would venture to guess a lot of them are going to stay test optional from here on out. Some, well, like I said, will only be temporary, others will continue. Test optional schools include the Ivy League, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, the University of California system, Boston College, Rice, as well as many of the schools that you very well know. Temple, St. Joe's, Fairfield, Gettysburg, American, Dickinson, Holy Cross, Wake Forest, and even NYU. If you want to see a full list of what schools are test optional, and to be honest with you, knowing the schools that a lot of our young men apply to, there's not very many that aren't test optional that the LaSalle guys will be applying to. You can check that out at fairtest.org. We'll get you that information. So, test optional school. This is a great option for a young man that may not be a great test taker, but has a solid GPA. This is also an option this year for some of the young men to apply to colleges that previously they may not have had or been eligible due to lower test scores. It could broaden the list of schools that a student intends to apply. However, like I said, do keep in mind that even though some of these more selective schools are now test optional, it just means that more emphasis and review will be placed on what classes they took, the rigor of the curriculum, the grades they received in those classes. So when they don't have an SAT to look at, they need to look more deeply into what is given to them. Also, with the possibility of more students applying, it does increase the overall competitiveness of certain colleges. Also, just because the school is in general test optional, there may be specific majors or programs at that school that are not test optional, such as nursing. Nursing is a great example at most schools that still does require SATs, even if the larger school itself is test optional. And while test optional can certainly help in certain cases, an interesting trend we found last year that the mid 50% range has risen over the last year for standardized tests. Much of this is due to who is actually submitting their SAT and ACT scores and who is not. In essence, your son, if he is at or above the range of SAT and ACT scores that a school usually accepts, we highly recommend that they submit the scores to that school still. So if they've taken the SATs and they have the score that school wants, send it. Send it. It's another resource for them to look at to determine admission. However, if they have maybe the GPA that the school typically is in the average for that school, but their SAT score is below, that's a conversation they're going to have with us to determine whether or not it's a good idea to go test optional to a certain school. And we'll have that conversation individually. Keep in mind, there could be, given your son's list of schools that he plans to apply to, it could go half and half. Half of them we say, you know what, these are great schools, you hit the mark on both SAT and GPA, let's send them off to both. Some of them we're just going to go test optional and go with just the GPA and the rigor of your curriculum. Superscoring is common for the SAT, and it is now actually being used for the ACT as well. I know some of you, I remember some of the parents from previous sons over the years, the ACT was not superscored before, it is now. Superscoring, just for those who may not know, means that your son took the test in April and took it in August. In April, he got his best math score, and in August, he got his best critical writing score. Those two go together, and that's what the school will look at. So it's not just based on each individual test. However, there are some schools that still do just individual sittings of exams. A great example of that, Penn State University. So Penn State will just take the best exam that you have, the individual testing. Mrs. Deal had hit on it a few minutes ago that we're having the SAT here at Lasalle on the 13th of October, which again is a great opportunity for the young men to have. They can come here to school in an environment that's comfortable to them, that don't have to get up early on a Saturday, things like that. But I do want you to keep in mind that most likely the scores for that test will not be returned until after November 1st. So 2 things to keep in mind with that. 1, if your son is planning to apply to a school with a November 1 deadline and he plans to send the scores to that school regardless of what he gets, because anything at this point could be helping, that test score is still eligible to be sent to that school because he took the test before the November 1 deadline. So even though the scores might not be in on November 1, they will still accept them after November 1. But a word of caution, if your son is contemplating whether to apply to a certain school based on SAT scores that may come in, and he is planning to apply to November 1 school, I caution him about taking the October 13th because he's going to have to apply to that school before the scores come in. So I highly recommend that if he's looking to take the exam one more time, and his options at this point are either the October 2nd, Saturday, or the Wednesday, October 13th, register for the Saturday, October 2nd. Your scores will be in before the November 1 deadline for that. And I can, of course, talk about that later if needs be, if it wasn't quite clear. Okay, excellent. Yeah, good. The various ways to apply to college. I'll do a little walk and talk while I do this. College these days is not as simple as just picking a school, having a deadline, sending it in. There are various ways to apply to schools these days. One of the most common is rolling admission. What that means in a nutshell is once a student's application and all supporting materials that need to be assessed for his admission are in, then the admissions officer will review it for admission. So, in essence, everything is in by October 1st, October 15th. A decision will be sent out within about 4 to 6 weeks. So they do it on a rolling basis. As it comes in, they make the decision, and they send it on out. Some of the schools that include with this are the Pennsylvania state schools that you see behind me, some of the larger state schools around the country, Alabama, Clemson, places like that. Then the one that you may know of the best is regular admission. Regular admission is a certain deadline, January 1, February 1, everything has to be in by this date, and we will review all applications after that point. Most schools have a regular decision deadline if they also have an early deadline as well. So they usually have an early deadline, which we'll talk about in about 30 seconds, and they'll have a regular deadline later past that. Then you have the early, so stay with me as we go down the rabbit hole here. Early action. In a nutshell with early action, you apply early and you find out early, okay? With early action, what are the advantages of doing that? Sometimes it can be put into a smaller pool of applicants. It also allows you to know information earlier that if more colleges need to be added to a list, maybe later in the process, we can do that. So you still have deadlines that haven't passed by applying early. As you see behind me, a good example of an early action is Scranton, a November 15th deadline, and you have everything back to you by the 15th of January. So you apply early, you know early. And it is non-binding, which means you still have until May 1st to make your ultimate decision as to whether or not you're going there. However, the opposite of that is early decision. Now, early decision works exactly like early action. Apply early, find out early, except early decision is binding. So if your son applies early decision to a school and is admitted to that school, that is the school he will be attending next year. Okay, it is a binding agreement. Early action, we recommend any student who does not plan to take an SAT or ACT beyond the deadline of that early action, apply early action to all the schools that they have on their list. Early decision is usually something that we have to have a conversation with because it does bind you to that one school. So we'll have those conversations with your sons, whether or not it's the right choice. There's a financial aspect that comes into it. Can we afford this? Things like that. So if you have questions, we're certainly open to answering them for you as well. And finally, and we'll go to the big slide. I know it's right there, but I think this shows it better. There is one last way of applying to colleges, or that we see. If you're looking up at the screen and you're saying to yourself, Georgetown, Notre Dame, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, and Harvard, my son has no intention of applying to any of those 6 schools. This means nothing to you. Do not worry about it. it will not affect your son in any way, shape, or form during the admissions process. Conversely, you do look up there and you notice your son does plan to apply to one or possibly multiple of these schools. Well, then this might come into effect. In essence, if your son decides to apply restrictive early action to Georgetown or Notre Dame, they are not allowed to apply early decision to any other school. So they have to go restrictive early action. That means they, if admitted, they still have till May 1st to decide if they want to attend there. But they cannot apply early decision to any other school. So maybe they like Georgetown, but they were thinking ED to Villanova. Well, they have to make the decision. Go restrictive early action to Georgetown, go regular to Villanova. Or conversely, go ED to Villanova and go regular to Georgetown. They have to make one of the two choices. Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, Yale, students may not apply EA or ED to any other private school, but can apply EA or ED to any public school. Okay? And there's not a whole lot of public schools that have EA or ED, so the options are limited. Students may also apply rolling or regular to all other schools that they plan to apply to. Now, the takeaway from this is this. That wasn't very good. That will not be on any of the red letters. The takeaway here is this is only going to be for a select few students, and we will have conversations with them as to whether or not this is the right choice for them. Some students, it might be the best shot at getting into certain schools, and this is the right choice. Others, after having the conversation, we decide, you know what? We're going to go regular after this school, and we're going to go EA to a number of other schools. Okay? So we'll have those conversations with your sons during our one-on-one meetings to decide if this is the best shot at getting into certain schools. And I believe I will turn it over to Mr. Brett. All right.
And we did have a couple questions. Why would I not do early decision? The positives of early decision, it increases your son's chances of admission, sometimes significantly. Sometimes colleges fill half of their freshman class using that because they know they've got those students, so it helps their yield. The big downside is financially. As a family, you have to be sure you can afford it, and we're going to touch on this down the line of how you can get a sense of that beforehand. So that is the major. If your son has fallen in love with a place and financially it makes sense, then it could be a positive choice for your son and you as a family. All right, so we talked about the dates and deadlines. We know how your son's going to apply, in theory. What goes into those decisions? Try to take away some of the mystery behind it. So for the past 20 years, when NACAC, the governing body, the National Association, talks to college admissions offices, this is what they come back with. Grades, the overall cumulative GPA, and within that context, the strength of schedule. Has your son challenged himself to the best of his ability, given what's offered at the high school that he's in? And keep in mind there are 27,000 high schools in the United States, so they're looking at it in these silos, the context of what goes on within the high school that he attends. They're also looking at grades in his college prep courses. So in general, that would be the 5 core academic areas, with exceptions. Now, if he's applying for something in the tech side, they're going to take those into account, music, art, etc. And then, if the college is looking at SAT, ACT scores, that makes up the other part of that. So typically, it's a blend, but it's around 75 to 80% of the decision comes down to the academics, the objective part of this. So sometimes young men will see that and they'll say, oh great, what's the point of the other 20 to 25%? Well, I always tell guys, you're going to have schools around the bubble. So if you have a 2.5 and a 10.10, there's probably 1,000 other students that are trying to get into that school that also have same grades and same test scores. If you have a 4.2 and a 14.50, same issues going on. College says, great, you've got the grades, you challenge yourself, you've got the test scores, now what? And that's where we get into the other factors in the admissions process. The essay. The essay has significantly increased in value over the years. Again, looking for that authentic voice of a 17, 18-year-old, showing why they actually want to be at that college. A lot of, especially for the highly selective colleges, these admission reps are reading 1,000 to 1,200 essays in a season. And they can tell the young man who's pretty much clicking everything on the Common App and sending it out the same kind of manufactured essay versus the one who's really done some homework and feels passionate about that university. Counselor and teacher recommendations, and this is the order of importance as well as we go through this. And then extracurricular activities. So when we ask the young men this the first time junior year, a lot of them have activities all the way at the top. Activities are important, but not as important. And within activities, the admissions offices typically are looking for depth over breadth. So what have they been involved in? Have they risen to some level of leadership? What's their level of commitment within that? And then we've got demonstrated interest, which we talked about. So your larger public state universities typically will not count demonstrated interest as much. They might be dealing with 70, 80,000 applications. Whereas small private universities might look into that a bit more. And more and more colleges are becoming more transparent in that approach, letting you know whether they do track demonstrated interest. But it's a great way for them to check. When that college came here to visit, and we typically have 170 colleges that visit here, did your son actually attend that? Did he sit in on that virtual open house? Did he go and make a campus visit if he was able to? Did he click on his emails, or did they all go to, they were never opened? Did he decide to follow a couple schools, not every single school, on social media, the ones that he was really interested in? And then an interview if offered, that's a no-brainer. If the interview is offered, he should be sitting for that. And then finally, all the different tipping points that go into this process, right? So it could be an athletic recruit, it could be legacy, it could be the geographic aspect. He's a young man applying to a place that doesn't have many students from our area. The major plays a large role in this. So we have a lot of young men that apply to business schools, engineering schools. They're still male-dominated. The colleges are looking for more of a balance. So we tell them to take that into account. Don't just say business because it sounds good. Do you actually want to do that as your major? Think about that as you go through this process. These are the things we share with the young men. Some trends we've seen. So last year, applications through the Common Application rose 11%. There's now 950 colleges on the Common Application. So it's never been easier for someone to click a bunch of schools, which has led to an increase in applications because of the ease of that. It's important to note, and we share this with your sons as well, the largest increases were in the most selective universities in the nation. If you saw any of the articles in the spring last year, the acceptance rates at some of the schools kept getting lower and lower. I think there was an article in The Onion a couple years ago. It said Stanford announces 0% acceptance rate. Stanford, to their credit, no longer publishes their admissions rate because they're trying to make some attempt to get away from some of the madness. And then large public flagship research universities saw huge increases. I think the University of Colorado went up 65% in applications last year. That's just one example. So obviously some of that was pandemic related and costs, but we've also seen for years here a trend in our young men looking at schools down south and big kind of ESPN schools, but that also have strong academics, strong student life. So, as we're counseling the young men and looking at their list, we're trying to not steer them away from these type of schools by any means, but to explain to them there are a lot of schools out there that are looking for A, students, and B, males. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago about the huge dip in males applying to college. So we're trying to share this with them so they come up with a creative list as they apply. And then you can see the increases there. This is the colleges, where they're at. So this was an increase of 22% in colleges located in the Southwest. And you can see those numbers there. Now, you could say, oh, it's only 8% increase in the Mid-Atlantic. Let me throw all my applications in there. The Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast already had a lot of students applying to those colleges. It's a very fertile area. But it's interesting to see where these trends are going. So we've got more students graduating high school than ever before, more applying to college, and more applying to multiple colleges because there's 950 colleges in the Common App. So that leads to this increase in applications. We had more students apply to places because they could go test optional last year. So they said, why not? Let me throw my hat in the ring at University X, which led to these record number of denials overall nationally. Again, our guys were 68% acceptance rate. That middle stat there, we always try to put it out there. a lot of the focus is always on the 20% of colleges in the nation that are considered selective. Those are the ones that take 50% or less of students that apply. But we always try to say the flip side, right? So if you're feeling stressed, if your son's feeling overwhelmed, it doesn't mean you don't take a shot at those type of schools, but 80% of the colleges out there take more than half the students that apply. And some of them have really excellent academic programs. Some of them, not that ranking is everything, are ranked higher than the schools that are turning a lot of people away. So again, it's about informing them, giving them some choices. And then, to just show a depressing statistic, that's Columbia in 1988 had a 65% acceptance rate, and that was last year. So we also, a couple of our colleagues in the field have started, for some of these selective universities, it's important to realize how many students they're denying. So to look at that as almost the denial rate. 94% of students who apply are denied. What is going to make you pointy in that group to stand out? And again, that's not to depress everyone. It's to be realistic as we go through the list and through the approach. We're looking at 3 fits as you sit with your son. The personal fit. Mara said he's going to have to live there for 4 years. So does he like it? Can he step foot on the campus and see himself there for 4 years and enjoy it? And all the things that go into that with them. The location, the campus setting. There's a difference between going to a school with 4,000 students and 40,000 students. Can he handle both of those? Some guys can. They could go either one. Some, they might be completely lost or completely bored at one. The academics we'll touch on a bit more. The social extracurricular atmosphere. Is there a balance between studying and working and grinding it out versus the social life? And can your son, what's his level of getting maybe caught up in things? Class sizes. So not only the student body, but if most of the classes, especially freshman year, are in a lecture hall, will that be the best place for him? Or will he thrive in that? He's the type of guy, I don't want to be called on with 12 guys and girls in the class. I'd rather be in a bigger setting. And then opportunities, internships, etc. The next part, the financial fit. Probably for a lot of you top of mind, and rightfully so, as we've seen college prices skyrocket. So can you afford this? The good thing is, as college prices have skyrocketed, there have never been more resources, and there's never been more transparency in getting a decent idea of whether or not you can afford it. And we have objective, realistic conversations with the young men. Most conversations, at some point as we're talking to them one-on-one, have you talked to mom and dad about what you can afford? Right? So we're not diving through your taxes, but we're trying to have that conversation. It's better to have that in September, October, November, than to have it in April or May, when he potentially gets into a school and then it may not be the right fit financially. So some of the tools to help determine that, SCORE, and in a moment you're going to see what SCORE does a little bit differently from some of the other sites. College Kickstart, one unique thing in that is that you can search based on what schools give the most need-based and also the most merit-based data. FAFSA Forecaster, in around 15 minutes, if you Google FAFSA Forecaster and put some basic information in, it would spit out what your expected family contribution is, so what the federal government thinks you can afford to pay. Typically, the EFC is much higher than, it's a very depressing number, but at least you can see what the government is using some of their numbers for you. And then one of the most important ones, this has been around for at least a decade, is the net price calculator. So every college, it's a federal law, has to have the net price calculator on their website. So you can just Google net price calculator and Lehigh, and it asks for your son's academic information. So it asks for grades, test scores. That's to see what kind of scholarships you may qualify for. And then it asks for some basic financial information, annual household income, some other info on your end, and it spits out a sample financial aid package of what they would have offered your son had he applied last year. And I always say, when you're seeing sticker prices of 60 or 70 grand, if you can get something that's roughly within 5 or 10 at this point, I think that gives you a good starting point as you go through this process. The last part of this, if you and your son are thinking of applying an early decision to a college where it's a binding agreement, most colleges, if you reach out to them, we'll do what's called an early read. So if you get your financial information in early October, reach out to the college. They'll give you a decent read of where you might stand in terms of that. Because a lot of our guys are not paying full pay when they go to college. We've also had, just one last thing on the FAFSA, a big question we get is, should I fill out the free application for federal student aid if I know I'm not going to qualify? I know my family's not going to qualify. Ultimately, it's your decision. Our experience with this, there's two reasons we suggest to do it. One is an increasing number of colleges, we just saw Virginia Tech, give out their merit scholarships. They don't give them out until you fill out the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. So that's one example. The other example is, without doing that, your son is not eligible for any of the low-interest government loans, typically the Stafford loan, either subsidized or unsubsidized, which allows him to take out around 26, 27 grand over the course of his 4 years. Sometimes that's the thing that bridges the gap between going to a school and not going to a school, being able to take out $7,500 junior and senior year. That can be the thing that allows someone to go. Sometimes a parent wants their son to have some skin in the game. So there are reasons potentially, and sometimes someone loses a job. And if you've already filled that information out, it makes it really quick for the financial aid office then to switch gears. I lost my job, something happened, there was an illness in the family, and now we can get that money to your son when he is on campus as well. The last thing with financial aid is something called the Css Profile. So before you completely glaze over, there's around 450 private, mainly private colleges and universities that require that form in addition to the FAFSA form. The Css Profile is run through the College Board, so that means it costs money. And if you look at it as the FAFSA essentially opens the door to your bedroom, the Css Profile opens the door to the closet financially and starts looking and rooting through things. So it's looking for more information. So it's just something to be aware of if you're filling these forms out. On September 23rd, we're going to have a lot more information on that from an expert in the field, and the sites that are on our website are going to help you get through and get a little bit more information ahead of time as well. Last one is the academic fit. Will my son thrive in this academic environment? Will he be overwhelmed? So every year we have a young man who might get into a school and then thinks, will I succeed? Will I thrive on this cutthroat competition, or would I be better in a place that's more collaborative? You know that, your son knows that as well. Will I be too distracted there? Does it have the majors that I want? Does it set me up for success to maybe get a double major and a minor? How about the internship programs, the co-op opportunities? What are the placement and the outcomes as he graduates? And then finally, the tools to use that: Score, College Kickstart, College Essay Guide, and having a sense of how your son has done here as he goes into a rigorous academic environment. I'm going to touch on our website. The end is near. We're going to be done by 8:30. And then Mrs. Deal is going to show you Score briefly from the parent point of view, and then we'll finish it off with Mr. Sawyer showing College Kickstart. So our website, just a few slides here, lshs.org/college. I always say to my guys, if I fall off a cliff tomorrow, you can probably muddle your way through just by hopping on here. At the top there, Jim, if you can just go back, you see all the tabs. There's the calendar, so any of the schools that are visiting are put up there. Any virtual open houses or in-person open houses that are happening will be put along there. SAT test dates, and then all the tabs across the top. All right, next slide. Our college counseling update. So every month we send an update. This is chock full of info. A big shout out to Mrs. Palopoli, Katie Palopoli, for blasting us into the late 2000s and out of Word and everything else. Lots of fun graphics in that. Everything you need every month, it's sent to your sons and you, is in that update. And then it's also here on our website. It's all hyperlinked to walk you through the whole process. And then below that, if you're anti-social media or you don't have Twitter, we have Twitter embedded in here. So everything that we put out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is also here. And it's a lot of unique information. So that's right there on the landing page of our website. College links and resources under the Applying to College tab is going to be very helpful and useful. So you can search for college planning, Standardized tests, applying to college, financial aid, athletics, all those tabs. We've done the work ahead of time of vetting and combing the internet to try and find the best sites that we feel are best, the best authentic ones that we trust, ones that give you efficient information. And then the final part that's really helpful is under the Applying to College tab, application process. So if you're feeling lost, where should my son be in this process? This is very detailed. Obviously, it's going to be tough to see up here, just so you know where to go when you get home or tomorrow. So it has all the deadlines. It walks through exactly what the responsibilities are. So just expand on everything we went through here. And this is something we run through with your sons every class until the end of October, kind of hammering it home. Here's what you need to be doing. All right? So with that, we're going to do a kind of a live little run-through of SCORE from the parent side. Show of hands, how many of you have been into SCORE? That's great. Yep.
This is my favorite part when I just get the microphone and can walk around with it. All right, so seriously, I'm going to get you guys out of here really quickly. For those of you, everybody in this room has access to SCORE. A lot of you logged in January when we first sent out the information, and then you haven't logged in since. Some of you are on it all the time and could probably come up here and show everybody what to do also. I'm not going to spend any more than 2 minutes, but if you click on My Student, this is going to bring you to your student's page. Your view of this page, my view as the counselor, and your son's view is all very similar. Personal information, academic overview, activities and achievements, all that type of stuff is right in here. You can search for colleges. There's all these different filters over here. I already put in some filters, and then these schools come up. If you look, you click on Jefferson, you get more information about Jefferson. If I go back, I like what I see about Jefferson. I hit suggest. That is going to show up in your son's list of colleges as a suggestion from you. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the dashboard to show you this right here on the dashboard. So I clicked on the SCORE. That's going to show you all the different schools that your son has in their list right now and some basic information. Mr. Brett just mentioned one of the ways that you can use SCORE for figuring out costs. They have a neat little cost calculator here. You can do things a various way. What's the average price? So you're not putting in any information whatsoever. It's just like, what's the average net cost to any student? Here you can, play around with it, make it income-based, and further go down with more information if you know your EFC that we just talked about. So just wanted to show you that, and then you also over here you can compare colleges. So you can just put in a few different schools that you want to compare. And then it's going to give you a side-by-side comparison. So again, a lot of great information that is here in SCORE. I encourage you, if you have not gone in and played around with it, to do so. Just one actual other thing. If I go into my student, and I go down to colleges and applications, and my colleges, there's a link to the Scoutergrams. Excuse me. Your son is going to be the Purple Star. This is going to give you an idea of guys that have applied from Lasalle to these schools in this time frame. You can play around with it, the type of application, they applied early, regular, etc. All right, so just if you haven't started using this, it's a great tool. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sawyer to talk about College Kickstart, which is something that our board approved last year for us to be able to provide to you guys, which is a great benefit.
That's okay. All right, so I'm going to finish us up tonight. So this is College Kickstart. Your sons all have access to this. We rolled it out to them back in the spring during the junior group advisory classes. In essence, what College Kickstart allows you to do is enter a list of schools that your son plans to apply to and find out whether or not that list is balanced. What I love about College Kickstart is that I always tell the young men, your parents love you, I like you. College Kickstart doesn't care. College Kickstart takes the emotion out of the equation. I would love to say, yes, let's give our best effort for that. But what College Kickstart allows you to do is enter a list of schools that you plan to apply to. You enter then your information over here, and it's the general academic information. It doesn't take extracurriculars into account. It doesn't take rec letters or essays into account. It takes the general admissions. Your SATs, your ACT, and your current GPA. Once you have a list of schools that you want to look at, you run Kickstart. The next screen comes up, and it gives you a letter grade. Now, this letter grade does not reflect what your son's academics are. That based on his grades and everything like that, he's a B- kind of student. No, that's not what it's doing. What it's doing is it's giving you a grade based on the list of schools that you gave. How balanced is your list? Now, some of your sons are going to run this list, and they're going to get a D. Some are going to run it and get an A+. And it's about the balance. But what this allows you to do is then look at it from a very objective standpoint and make decisions as to which schools you truly want to apply to. So it gives you 4 different types of rankings once you run that list. It gives you schools that are unlikely to happen, schools that are reaches, schools that are targets, and schools that are likely going to happen. Like I said, it takes the emotion out of the equation. It says, if with your GPA and your SAT, sorry, Princeton's just not going to happen. However, you have some great other options in here. Your targets, your likelies. You got a couple of reaches, depending upon what else you do, what else you might be bringing to the party. Those are the kinds of things that we can help smooth over and say, yeah, given what you do in X, Y, and Z, you might be a good candidate for that school. Let's try and go for that. But what we really love about College Kickstart is that it then allows you to move schools around. So you can run numerous lists. And I've looked at College Kickstart. Some of your sons have run several kinds of lists. Run it with going ED for this school, going all regular, taking out all of my unlikelies, putting in a whole bunch more targets, and trying to get a balanced list. But what you can do is it gives you an option over here. It says it's an unbalanced list. Please add a target and consider removing some of those unlikelies. So if it says, okay, a target, it allows you to go in and decide what is your target. What do you want? So you can decide size, medium. I don't want a medium school. I don't want a small school. I want a large school. I definitely want to stay in a suburban urban area, and I really like homes, so I'm going to stay in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. Well, then it allows you to then go through this entire list of schools based on size and all the settings you just gave it, that College Kickstart is going to give you some possible other options for targets. Again, this is a great tool to give a no-nonsense look at your list based on academics and then rework your list in conjunction with us. Okay? There are a lot more information in Kickstart. We only have so much time tonight. You can go a little bit deeper, just like with SCORE and everything. Look at it from a financial standpoint, what kind of packages do they offer, things like that. But we are going to turn it over for general questions at this time.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mara. And thank you for sitting here for an hour and a half. Mara did prep you. We will give you a lot of information. And at this point, because I'm sure the question you may ask could also be something that someone else wants to hear. If you have questions, you can raise your hand, and we'll call on you and answer. Yes, sir.
I wanted to know how are the students supposed to notify you through SCORE that they're going early decision?
Question was, how will the students notify us that they're saying, hey, let's just say their college list and then for early decision? Couple parts to it. One, they'll go into the college counseling office and they'll talk to Mrs. Palopoli. And part of that is we never want to lose the face-to-face in this process. And she has a lot of other questions behind the scenes that she wants to ask them. And it's the first line of defense. If something seems off or we need to get involved, she'll say, all right, this is the deal. I just met with Jack, and this is I'd like you to meet with him. He gives a list. It's an initial list. It's not set in stone. So I always say he can come in with 3 schools tomorrow. 2 days later, take them one off, put another one on. At the same time, concurrently, he's doing it in SCORE. So he should, in theory, have a list of schools under following in SCORE, and he'll slowly be moving those over to applying once he's confirmed, right, here's where I'm going, and then ultimately applied. When he does that, it automatically lists them in the order in which he needs to get them in by. So he doesn't need to worry about an Excel spreadsheet or writing it on a piece of paper. In terms of the early decision, at that point, if he says, I want to apply an early decision to Syracuse, he's going to have to fill out something electronically. You're going to sign it, he's going to sign it, and the college council will sign it, and then we have an internal Lasalle old school handwritten document that he does as well. The third part of this is he's also putting these schools in the common application because that's how he's applying. So all of those match up. And what happens with all that is if he follows that, nothing gets lost in the process. Deadlines don't get lost. We have an idea ahead of time. And the reason for that October 8th deadline is because there are probably going to be around 85% of our young men that will apply somewhere by November 1st. It allows us to get everything out on our end before that deadline. It doesn't mean he has to apply by then. He just needs to have let us know, I'm definitely doing something early. I don't know what it is yet, and I'll let you know soon, but it's going to happen at some point. And then early decision as well, we're going to have a conversation with your son. Do you understand the financial implications? Do you understand that a lot can change in 5-6 months? So you might find out at Christmas that you're into there. Will you potentially have any regrets? So to think through that process. Are you prepared to withdraw all those other applications if you encounter the good problem of getting into your top choice? Other questions?
Is there any prep time for the interviews? Like, do you help them figure out how to approach it?
Yes, so prep time for the college interview day. 2 areas. So in the group advisory class leading into that, we have around 10 minutes where we go through that with them. We also share with them a number of common interview questions that they may be asked, and then prep them on what they should say as well. And then one-on-one, we're available before that as well. And we'll often have guys, even beyond college interview day, who'll come in and say, I have an alumni interview at Penn. Can you sit with me for 10, 15 minutes and walk through, practice with some of these questions? The question is large, strong GPA, maybe test scores that wouldn't match up for that type of school. The quick takeaway with that is we would say test optional, but we would want to meet, and it's not a blanket statement for every guy in that situation. Maybe there's other things he's bringing to the table. And also, what's that school looking for? And is that school's SAT inflated a bit because the students that have been applying there, it's only been the students that have had really strong test scores sending in their scores. If he's going to go test optional, does he have other things, activities? Is it going to be a strong essay, strong counsel recommendations that he can lean on in that process? And every school was a little bit different last year, but roughly, especially for the selective schools and highly selectives, around 1/3 of the students, guys and girls across the nation that got accepted were test optional. So it wasn't like they were just taking students with scores. But when there's a lot of competition, that extra data point does help. But I think it opens up. 10 years ago, these young men never had a chance at some of these schools, and now they're in the mix, and they can have a shot at it. And as we said, he might have 8 schools on his list. 5 might be I'm sending my scores. 3 may be I'm going test optional. Yes.
When the colleges come to visit, whether it's virtually or in person, are the kids excused from class?
So when the college comes to visit, so we'll have 170 or so of those that typically come. If they're free, they can just come down. They have to register and score beforehand. If they have class, they have to respectfully ask their teacher, ideally in person, but since we meet every other day, sometimes that can be tough. So an email, preferably before 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night for the teacher. This school is coming, they're a top choice of mine, may I miss class? So they're allowed to. Most teachers say yes. However, class is every other day, so there's going to be an increased chance that there might be a test that day. A lot of young men on their own, if they're taking a class, might say, you know what, I can't afford to miss this hour-long class, even though these visits are 30 minutes. And they may say, I can't afford to meet it, and they pop down to one of us or Mrs. Palopoli and say, can you let the rep know that I wanted to be there and get some information for me? Or a teacher may say, I really can't let you miss this class. We encourage the young man, am I allowed to show up a couple minutes late, come down and shake the rep's hand, or whatever we're doing now. And finally, with that, as long as we have the college rep's names, so we always tell the young man, if you can't make it, they're not going to hold that against them. But the next step is that he reaches out and says, I wasn't able to attend because of my class, or because I had a test, or whatever it may be. Still very interested. Can you send me some information? Just to show that he still has that interest. Because it's an easy box to check on the college admission side. Johnny didn't come when we were at the school, and he claims it's a top interest.
It's as Mrs. Steele said earlier, it's a great way to not only show demonstrated interest that you are interested in the school, even though you can't miss class that day. Plus, as we said before, 9 times out of 10, that person that is coming to do that presentation is going to be the one who will evaluate the application 2 months down the road. So coming down, that nice handshake, sorry can't make it, I have class, there's a test, I'll follow up with you in a day or 2 with some questions. Fantastic. That goes a long way later. When I was in admissions before, you remembered those students because they stepped up. So we always highly recommend that they do that.
And we encourage guys to sit, if they're not sure about a school, sit in on that presentation. You'd be amazed how many guys will just wander into one because their buddy's going, and they come out saying, oh, I didn't know about Elon. You know what? I'm going to apply there. I'm going to visit there. Yes? The GPA on score there? So the GPA, okay, so is the GPA weighted or unweighted on the Lasalle transcript that we sent? The answer is it depends on your son. So if he's taken an honors or an AP class, in any of his first 3 years here, the GPA is weighted because he would have received a half-point quality point for honors or a full point for AP. If his first honors or AP is senior year, there's no weight to it yet because he doesn't have any grades. He would get weight in January when the GPA is recalculated. So our GPA, though, just says, on the transcript, just says the GPA. It doesn't say whether it's weighted or unweighted. When they're filling out the common application, this is one of those things we go through with them in class. We explain to them, if you've taken an honors or AP, it's weighted. If you have not, it's unweighted.
So on the college website, do they list their average GPA, and are they talking about a weighted or unweighted?
So the question is, on the college website, when they list their GPA, are they talking about it being weighted or unweighted? They're not going to like the answer. It depends on the college. So some of them will say based on a weighted GPA. A lot of them will recalculate it, which means they have their own way of doing that internally. So a lot of them may take away the weight. So they might give a grade for rigor. So it's not like we say that to the guys and like, well, why do I take APs? They might just take away the weight for it, but they might get in their rubric a bounce for having a more challenging course load. But it's important as you and your son, if you do any of these virtual tours and or real in life ones, that's a great question to ask at the end of the presentation. Your average GPA you mentioned here is a 3.8. Is that weighted or unweighted? Do you just look at core classes? Do you take out non-academic classes in that GPA? So Maura brought up a good point. College Kickstart standardizes the GPA, so they try to level it out with the 27,000 high schools that are in the United States. And then the other part of this is SCORE. That GPA is what's been going on here at Lasalle, historical data. So it's, if SCORE in some ways is the better one to believe as opposed to the college's own GPA. If your son has a 3.5, and most students with a 3.5 have been getting into that school, but that school says it's a 3.8, you would put more weight in, not to use weight, you put more emphasis, thank you, Mr. Huber, no charge, into the SCORE. And by the way, all of your sons received a transcript in class, the first group advisory class. So they already have that. If they're applying to a college that needs them to self-report, they already have, I'm sure they've laminated it by now and it's next to them at all times, but they already have that. if they've lit it on fire, Mrs. Palopoli, we've copies of it. And by now, their courses are already solidified too. So now it's an official, we're moving towards that official transcript. So there's no more drop-add period. So the colleges are not only making a decision on their grades, but also how well they're challenging themselves senior year, which is a year in which most guys tend to go up grade-wise.
So if my son is set on one college and he wants early decision, does that hurt his chance at getting a good financial aid package?
So this is a question we get a lot. My son's applying early decision. He's set on that college. That's all he wants to do. Does it hurt his chances of getting a good financial aid package? Most colleges will say that it does not. So if we take them at their word and believe them, and we've seen for most of our students, that's what's happened. That they have, if they would have been eligible for a merit scholarship, they're going to get the merit scholarship. The cynical side of things tells you that they've already got that student locked in. Now, a way to be aware of that is to do that, get that early read from the financial aid office ahead of time, do the net price calculator. If it's saying that he should be getting 20 grand in something, at least you've got that, especially if it came from the financial aid office. Hey, I had an early read, and it said your sticker price was 65, but I would only have to come up with 42. What's going on here? I'm sorry? Their financial aid office. Yep, right to the source.
Once the boys apply, and then where are they checking that the teachers that you guys did your recommendation and all the stuff, is that in store or right at the college?
So the question is about teacher recommendations. So we have our own internal deadline for the teachers to have their information uploaded and our information as well. So they can check and score, but in general, we're telling them their responsibility is to get their part done and out by whatever the deadline is. And they need to trust that we'll have our part done and out by the deadline as well. So in other words, and Mrs. Deal touched on this, your son may tell us he's applying to a school. He may not hit submit till October 29th. We may have sent our stuff 2 weeks beforehand. The opposite could be true. He may submit next week. Our stuff may not go out for 2 to 3 weeks. It's perfectly fine. The deadline in this scenario is November 1st. There's no bonus points given at almost all these schools for the application that comes in September 20th versus the one that comes in October 28th, if we're looking at early action, early decision. Again, we tell the guys that the reps are not sitting there waiting to download applications at most schools. They're busy, especially with what's been going on the last couple of years. They're not out there necessarily making decisions at that point. And we follow up with teachers behind the scenes. So if there's someone that's a little bit late on a deadline, and believe me, our internal deadline is not October 31st at 8 p.m. So, question?
Is it specific to the student, or you just key in data and just does the school know it's my son's information when you're using that price calculator?
Great question, but no, it's not specific to the student. And so the college board runs one. There's probably 500 colleges on there, and there's another independent group that runs one. The colleges can decide how much information they want you to put in, but they're not gathering your information. So some of them are very basic, some of them are really in-depth. Obviously, the more in-depth it is, the better sense you're going to get from their calculator. We typically say, when in doubt, that the net price calculator from the college itself is probably going to be one of your best sources, but it can't hurt to also use the one you saw there in SCORE. Yes?
Can you just give a real brief rundown again on how do the parents access the SCORE and Kickstart? Do they log in separately and see what they're, I know my son was working on stuff on there.
Great question. So SCORE you were invited to, so we can invite you again to SCORE, so you have a login to get to the parent side of things.
But you see what they see?
We see
What they're working on?
we see what they see in terms of SCORE, because that's how we send everything. We send everything electronically, transcript, our letters through SCORE. College Kickstart is student-driven, so You have to have a lovely, warm conversation and say, hey, can we sit here and can you log me into College Kickstart? So there's not a parent portal or login for College Kickstart. It's your... And what we typically do after this night is tomorrow or Friday, resend it to anyone who is not a part of it. And there's a tutorial video as well. It's very intuitive.
But you'll be seeing what your kid sees when he's on school, like what he's looking at as far as...
For the most part, you'll see the colleges he's interested in.
And you can recommend colleges.
Yeah.
You can suggest colleges to him on it as well.
So when we're sitting there with him, we have colleges that he's put in. We've got ones that Mr. Sawyer has suggested, and then one that Mom or Dad has suggested. But he has control over sliding it over that I'm actually going to apply to that school. And he has control over coming to Mrs. Palopoli and say, here's my list, I'm taking this off, I'm putting this on, etc. Colleen? Yeah. So the question was, what is the downside of applying early action? In general, there's no downside to applying early action, in general. So a student can apply to 5, 6, 7 schools early action. Let's say they were all November 1st. He'd find out at Christmas time where he stands. And we always say, even if it's a denial then, it's better to get it, minus it being Christmas, it's better to get it then than have to wait till March. So you can pivot and maybe add some more schools. The exception to that is there are some young men who feel they might look better in a competitive pool waiting until January in regular decision when they can see their first semester grades and how that impacts their cumulative GPA. Or a young man that's taking November or December SAT or December ACT. So there are some cases where that may help them. And keep in mind, early action, while it shows that your son is proactive and it's a top choice, it typically doesn't have anywhere near the bump in terms of boosting chances for admission that regular decision does. That being said, way in here, it's rare that I've had a young man not do early action for a reason of waiting to see where his grades are going to be. Usually they do it. But if he's on the fence, it's kind of like a test option. There might be a young man who's unsure, and we give him that advice of sitting down, looking at the context of the list of the schools who's considering. It was definitely more of an anomaly, historically speaking. They really blended into this thing is not science, it's a blend of science and art, and there's a lot of subjectivity to it. There was a lot of pressure on schools to secure their yield, and if that meant that there was a ghost application, which is what they call someone who applies to Tulane, and Tulane never hears from them, or there's nothing. Those young men that might have stronger grades and test scores than other applicants may get deferred or denied in the process. There's some schools locally that do that because they'd rather go with, still a strong student, but someone who they're more confident that might actually show up on campus because they've been engaged. Especially at college, which increasingly private colleges that are tuition driven, that need that money. A lot of out-of-state colleges because college costs more, so you're going to pay more if your son goes to Clemson than if you lived in South Carolina. Those colleges tend to be a little bit more generous depending on how many students they have to take from their home state. And I think a lot of the reaches that became likelies for our guys, some of those guys behind the scenes, we knew the stories as in maybe there wasn't a lot of competition of other guys from here applying for them. Maybe they had some other unique pointed areas that they had in their application, a strong essay, really robust activities. Yeah, it was definitely a topsy-turvy year. And again, some of the most selective schools historically or academically competitive ones in the nation that were smaller or mid-sized had some trouble last year getting students. Because the large public flagships did really well and the ultra-selectives did really well in terms of applications.
So you think we're back closer to normal this year then?
can't. We hope. I mean, it's all. I would like to think that we would be back to do. And still, I mean, still here, most of our stuff tracked the way it should. But we had some outlying cases that we had conversation. And any of those, we always have a conversation, a follow-up with the admissions office to try and get some context.
I just had a question about the deadline. So when you say November 1st, can you actually hit submit November 1st, or is it really October 31st? And does it matter when they pull it down or only when you hit the button?
So I'll answer that part first. It's when your son hits the button is when it counts. It's funny, we get that question more and more, especially from the young men lately. It used to be like Halloween. It had to be in 11:59 of Halloween, but increasingly colleges make it 11:59 of November 1st. We get a little sweaty that he's doing that on Halloween night. And that's where some of the vagaries in this happen, when someone that has the test scores and grades for whatever the school may be, and they kind of mail in an essay last minute, that can be the thing that a college just sees through that in terms of yield. And we even, so to your point, I think on the digital screen the last 2 years, we put up, this means 11:59, and more colleges are sharing that as well, what that actually means. And if your son does apply towards the end of October, there will be sometimes weeks before it's even downloaded. On the flip side, if your son applies next week and he gets mail saying this is missing, our transcript, our letters, it's because it's missing. We haven't sent it yet. But we're not even near the deadline. It's just in terms of volume in our process, it just may not be there yet. So we always say he can always come in, he can check. But 99% of the time, it's sitting in the cloud, it just hasn't been downloaded by the college. And we've never had a situation where a student has been penalized because a college downloaded it past the deadline